I was erased. Not just let go, but completely deleted from the system. Denied credit for everything I had meticulously built and replaced by someone who barely understood the basics. This was my reality after 15 years of silently holding the company together. They pushed me out in a morning meeting, expecting me to simply vanish. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I left, and I built something far superior. Now they're paying to use it, and they still don't realize it's mine. If you've ever felt undervalued, I created this for you. Tell me in the comments, what did they take from you? They didn't just fire me, they erased me. One moment, I was Teresa Miller, Senior Data Architect, with 15 years of hands-on experience navigating complex database migrations, ensuring regulatory compliance, and performing critical system triage under immense pressure. The next, my badge wouldn't scan, my email was deactivated, and my internal profile redirected to a generic placeholder. No farewell message, no transition plan, just silence, as if removing my name from the system could erase my contributions. The meeting itself was a mere formality. A calendar block ominously titled Strategic Reorganization Discussion. Held in a small, windowless conference room they reserved only for quiet dismissals. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, arrived 7 minutes late, nodding as if bestowing a great favor by his presence. He began reading from a pre-written script, one I'm certain he hadn't even glanced at. He spoke of synergistic alignment, optimizing legacy infrastructure, and reallocating resource bandwidth. I used to decipher such corporate jargon for junior staff on the fly. Now, it was being wielded against me. Brenda from HR sat beside him, her lips pressed tightly, as if instructed not to speak unless addressed. Across from me sat Liam, their new tech prodigy, barely 30, fresh from a high-flying consulting firm, already convinced that sleek dashboards and automation could replace years of intuition and hard-won experience. Liam didn't even look at me, engrossed in flipping through a pristine tablet, occasionally nodding to himself as if he were already running the show. He was. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I watched them deliver their decision with a polished detachment. And when they handed me a pristine white folder containing a generic severance package, I didn't reach for it. Mr. Harrison offered a thin, awkward smile and said, "We appreciate your contributions, Teresa." Contributions, as if I had merely donated a used server. I stood up slowly, not out of hesitation, but to make them wait, just a little longer. I wanted them to feel the sudden weight in the air, the void my absence would create. Without raising my voice, I scanned the room once. My gaze settled on the corner where I had once briefed the executive team on a critical system failure that could have crippled our entire West Coast operations. The same corner where Mr. Harrison had praised me for saving the multi-million-dollar contract that kept our fiscal year afloat. He didn't mention that today. No one did. I walked out of the building with nothing in my hands, no box, no papers, not even my personal effects. I had already moved them the day before. You learn to feel the shift before it lands. The casual, offhand comment in a hallway, the sudden exclusion from crucial planning calls, the subtle pause when your name arises in a team meeting. I had seen it coming, but I also knew what they hadn't anticipated. You see, I was never just a data architect. I was the translator, the buffer between obscure code glitches and crippling regulatory fines, the one who rerouted critical data flows during unexpected system outages, who flagged early signs of vendor instability before contracts even hinted at trouble. None of it was formally documented, not because I was hoarding power, but because no one ever asked. No one cared how it got done, only that it did. And now, they believed they could replace me with a platform. They thought Liam's shiny dashboards and AI plugins could replicate instinct. They were profoundly mistaken. I didn't take the severance. I didn't ask for references. I didn't even say goodbye. I stepped outside into the crisp January air and didn't look back. Because what they had taken from me wasn't a title or a paycheck. What they had taken was the illusion that they ever truly saw me. And what I took from them, that came later, much later. I didn't return. I redirected. They believed that because nothing was written down, it never existed. That was their first grave error. What they failed to realize was that I never needed a manual. I was the manual. Every system they ran, every contract that didn't spectacularly implode, every government audit that passed flawlessly, every crisis that was quietly absorbed into the operational flow, I had already mapped those events in my mind long before they occurred. But try explaining that to a room full of men in suits who believe efficiency is merely a number on a dashboard. The very things they labeled unscalable were precisely what kept their operations intact. When I rerouted 3 critical Eastern Corridor data deliveries to avoid a last-minute security lockdown, I didn't document it. I didn't have to. When a compliance auditor flagged a misfiled record from the Johnson account, I had already corrected it 2 days before it triggered a penalty because I knew how Johnson's representative logged her backups when she was stressed. I knew who needed to be called directly instead of emailed. I knew which vendor's response time plummeted when his mother's surgery was scheduled, and which engineer always overlooked line 17 of the compliance report. I didn't carry those details out of loyalty. I carried them because no one else could. But they wanted a system that didn't need someone like me. They thought if they cleared the slate, digitized the process, and built something cleaner, leaner, simpler, they would be free. But simplicity without memory is just ignorance with a glossy user interface. The irony is, I tried to share what I knew, more than once. Not through formal lectures, but in quiet moments. I offered to create bridge documents, to train junior staff on the why behind our emergency procedures, to explain why some protocols weren't failures, but rather fail-safes we had learned through sheer grit and near catastrophe. They declined. Too time-consuming, they said. Too hard to scale, they claimed. They wanted plug-and-play, but my work was never plug-and-play. You just feel the shift before it cracks. The moment they shut me out, they lost access to the real map, because their blueprint was only skin-deep. Mine was structural. They erased what they couldn't see, assuming the surface was enough. But the cracks weren't on the surface. The cracks were in the rhythm. The way data transfers moved slightly faster on Thursdays due to undocumented overtime. The way Route 29 always lagged during lunar holidays due to unspoken staffing gaps. The way new hire compliance always dipped in Q1 because HR's onboarding portal froze under traffic every year without fail. They didn't just lose data when they deleted me, they lost context. And context is the only thing that tells you what's about to break before it does. I didn't remind them. I didn't warn them. They had chosen ignorance dressed as innovation, and what they didn't know was about to cost them. Because when you erase the map, you don't just lose direction. You lose the roads you didn't even know were there. 3 weeks after I disappeared from their system, I received a message on LinkedIn from a founder I vaguely remembered meeting at a data analytics conference years ago. Her name was Dr. Lena Chen, and she ran a small tech startup specializing in predictive analytics for complex supply chains. Her message was brief. You once spoke about building systems that think like people. Are you still thinking about that? I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit, not because I wasn't interested, but because I was done wasting energy on people who only listened when it was convenient for them. But Lena wasn't like them. She followed up with a voice message, just one sentence. I don't need your resume. I need your brain. That was the first time in months someone had asked for what I actually offered. So, I agreed to a coffee meeting. Her office wasn't sleek, no glass walls or artisanal espresso, but it vibrated with energy, curiosity, and a silence that made space instead of pressure. She didn't pitch me equity or some flashy executive title. She simply asked me, what systems fail in silence? And what blind spots can no software truly see? I told her, not because I was selling, but because she genuinely listened. The next week, I joined their weekly planning sprint. Then, I began mapping out what I called behavioral failures, not user errors, but system assumptions that ignored subtle human pattern shifts. The team didn't flinch. They sketched models. They asked incisive questions. They brought engineers into the conversation, not to override the logic, but to reflect it. And just like that, I found myself building something I had never been given permission to build before. A system that didn't just track outcomes, it anticipated fractures. Not with brute force alerts or meaningless KPIs, but with context layers. Audit prep dashboards that adjusted based on seasonal hiring trends. Vendor reliability scores that factored in unspoken variables like region-specific weather volatility, even contract templates with embedded historical prompts to flag. This usually breaks here. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was clarity. And for the first time, I wasn't whispering truth into a void. I was laying the foundation for a platform that didn't pretend human memory was irrelevant. I wasn't coming for my old job back. I was building something that ensured they'd eventually have to come to me, even if they didn't know it yet. Still doing the romanticized design to hurt them, that's the part no one ever believes. The platform wasn't built as a weapon. It was built as a cure. A cure for everything they thought could be automated, but never truly understood. Lena's team gave me the space, and I gave them the framework. Not a rehash of existing models, but a living system, a structure that anticipated the silent fractures before they became public collapse. We called it Nexus. Not just a logistics tool, not just a compliance tracker. Nexus was a memory engine. It took all the things corporate systems ignored, unwritten shifts in behavior, context-based triggers, trust decay, and turned them into predictive signals. Not alerts that screamed after the damage was done, but quiet pulses that warned you where to listen. I didn't feed it my old company's data. That wasn't necessary. What I built were universal principles that worked anywhere people operated under pressure, and systems pretended everything was fine. We coded in behavioral thresholds, patterns that didn't show up in metrics but showed up in mood. When clients shifted tone subtly across emails, when field teams started using short-form responses more frequently, when site logins dropped 2% but were still marked as healthy by the dashboard, Nexus caught those changes, flagged them, and gave people a chance to ask questions before they needed to apologize. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Within 3 months, 2 mid-sized aerospace vendors adopted our beta. One of them used it to catch a pre-inspection failure 3 weeks before their scheduled audit that saved them $280,000. They renewed before the pilot even ended. Word traveled quietly, not in headlines or LinkedIn posts, but through side conversations, back-channel recommendations, and sudden demo requests from firms I had never heard of. And then it happened. One of the procurement heads from my old company, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, booked a meeting through our inquiry portal. No name attached, just a company email, a burner domain, and a request. Interested in system demo for proactive compliance forecasting, Q3 rollout urgency. They didn't know who built it, not yet. They were just trying to survive a collapse they hadn't fully grasped. But I had, and Nexus was built for moments exactly like this, not to punish, but to expose, not to destroy, but to reveal what happens when people try to digitize away memory and call it modernization. I didn't spike the price. I didn't even show up on the call. Lena handled the walkthrough. Her tone was calm. Her answers were precise. And when they asked if the system had any foundation in legacy processes, she said, "This system was designed by someone who carried the weight of forgetting, so others didn't have to." They didn't recognize the line, but I did, because I had said those exact words once in a budget meeting they barely paid attention to. Now they were paying to hear them again. This time, through a system they couldn't afford to ignore. They didn't know it was me, not at first. The contract came through under a generic procurement initiative, buried inside a batch of digital transformation rollouts, approved during a crisis control session. By the time their legal team signed off, Nexus had already been deployed across two of their most vulnerable divisions: compliance oversight and supplier integrity. I read the rollout memo, forwarded by someone on Lena's team. It was almost poetic. To enhance operational resilience and anticipate vendor risk, we're adopting a third-party behavioral analytics tool to support proactive audits and compliance stabilization. They made it sound like their idea. They had no idea I was reading every single metric they produced, watching them feed usage logs into a system that only existed because they had refused to listen when I was still in the building. But I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just watched the reports come in. The errors they couldn't explain, the flags they couldn't trace, the subtle corrections Nexus made before their dashboards even noticed a blip. They had no idea the code was responding to rhythms I had memorized long before they replaced me. Things like seasonal labor inconsistencies, or which suppliers quietly altered their schedules to avoid inspections after a holiday weekend. Nexus saw it all, because I had seen it all when no one thought it mattered. Now, they were paying per seat, per user, to re-access knowledge they once discarded as outdated instinct. They hosted a webinar to promote their new compliance culture. I didn't watch it, but someone sent me a clip. Mr. Harrison, still CEO, stood in front of a branded slide and said, "We've reimagined how we view risk through systems that learn from human nuance, not just data." He didn't know those words were mine, verbatim. I had written them in an internal memo that never received a response. Now, they were quoted in his keynote. I didn't call him out. I didn't show up. That wasn't the point. The point was this. They had fired the person who built their silent safety net, and now, unknowingly, they had licensed it back from her. Not as an employee, not as a partner, but as a silent line item buried under strategic vendor solutions. I didn't need a title anymore. I had something better: influence without attachment, power without noise. They thought I was gone. I was just upstream, watching, calculating, collecting what they once believed was disposable. Now, it was their most expensive subscription. The dashboard pings every Monday at 6:05 a.m., not because I asked it to, but because that was always the hour when things began to break. The shift after weekend silence, the hour of forgotten resets and overlooked entries. Now, Nexus alerts me with a soft summary. Vendor trust thresholds, behavior drift flags, suppression patterns, compliance lag indicators. It speaks in the language I invented, translated into clean metrics for people who used to shrug when I warned them something felt off. I don't reply to the alerts. I just read them. I watch as the system predicts the same failures I used to catch with a glance, now dressed in heat maps and variable flowcharts. The company that once erased me is now functioning through a framework that carries my fingerprints in every line of code, every escalation curve, every silent correction. And they don't know. That's the part. I never needed recognition. Their names show up in the user list, but mine never does. I don't exist inside their org chart. I'm not part of their return to office policy. No onboarding document references what I contributed. But when they run their quarterly report and the failure rate stays below threshold for the third straight cycle, someone will nod in satisfaction, unaware that the thing holding their numbers steady isn't the system they built. It's the system they lost. A new manager once reached out anonymously through a feature request channel. She asked if Nexus could someday anticipate breakdowns in team cohesion before it showed in the numbers. I smiled. She didn't know I had already started building that layer. Because that's what it was always about. Not revenge, not retribution. Redirection. They wanted to forget me, so I let them. And in that forgetting, they made room for something better. Not better for them, better for me. I log in, read the reports, make quiet tweaks, Then I close the window and get on with my life. I don't dwell. I don't return. I never applied again. They still think they replaced me, but every Monday, like clockwork, they run on something I left behind. And I'm still the only one who knows how it breathes. They never sent a message, never acknowledged the ripple effects, never even asked what else I had been carrying when I left. But I saw it reflected in every delayed audit, every panicked contract review, every quiet system patch rushed through after Nexus flagged a pattern no one understood. I wasn't looking for credit. I just watched, week by week, as they adjusted to a system they believed was new, not realizing it had been built from the shadows of the one they broke. What they called innovation was just memory restructured. What they branded as foresight was just my hindsight repackaged. The cost of erasing me wasn't in the press or the market. It was in the gap between what they thought they could rebuild and what I never wrote down. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to be seen. I only needed time. Time to design something so effective they couldn't avoid it, and so quiet they'd never notice whose hands had shaped it. That's the difference between being replaced and being remembered. They replace my name, but they run on my silence. And that silence, that cost, was never on their balance sheet. Only mine. A lesson from this story. This story isn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It's about recognition earned through restraint. Teresa's journey shows us that not all power needs to announce itself. Sometimes the deepest impact is made not by striking back, but by walking away with what they never realized they needed most: your knowledge, your instinct, your silent contribution. She didn't sabotage, she didn't scream, and she didn't seek applause. Instead, she quietly redirected her energy into something bigger, something that eventually forced those who erased her to depend on what they tried to dismiss. In today's fast-moving, hyper-automated world, it's easy for companies and institutions to undervalue the people who hold systems together with memory, trust, and care. We glorify data while ignoring the people behind it. We replace presence with platforms. But what Teresa's story reminds us is that no amount of artificial intelligence can truly replace emotional intelligence, the unspoken understanding of how people work, what they need, and when things are about to fall apart. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes you won't get credit, you won't get justice. But that doesn't mean you've lost, because surviving with your values intact and building something stronger from that pain is a form of justice too. Teresa didn't need her name on the door. She built the door, and now they walk through it without even realizing who crafted the hinges. How to get started today. Start documenting your value for yourself, even if no one asks for it. In relationships that aren't defined by your title, but by trust, don't fight to stay where you're undervalued. Redirect that fight into something that reflects your worth. Most importantly, protect your energy. Not everything deserves your reaction. Sometimes, silence is your sharpest weapon. If this story reminded you of a time you were overlooked, underestimated, or quietly erased, share it in the comments. You're not alone. And if you're building your own version of a Nexus, we want to hear about that too. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak to your resilience, and share this with someone who's been holding it all together in silence, because they deserve to know they're not invisible, and their story isn't.